So today we are going to talk about decent work and economic growth with young people at the center. And without further ado, I would like to invite all of the speakers to join me to sit on the stage. First is Ken Shawa from ILO. Please give your warm welcome. Yes, thank you so much. Wait, can we move the slide first? Let all the speakers sit. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Next is Iza Lehtas from OHCHR. And last but definitely not least, Carla Correa from UNICEF AirPro. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's okay, I'll join you guys very soon. It's okay. So, because we have to be very mindful of the time, so I would like to move on to the next, which is the first presentation from our speakers from ILO, Mr. Ken Shawa. Okay, so Mr. Shawa is a Malawian national and a senior economist and head of the Regional Economic and Social Analysis Unit at the ILO's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific in Bangkok, Thailand, and a member of the ILO's Research Department. He coordinates ILO's research work and leads the analytical work of the region. His research interests include the economics of labor markets, health and labor, the growth finance environment nexus, trade, and agricultural policy. Please, once again, give your warmest welcome to Ken Shawa.
I will need to do some gymnastics to be able to read that, but also to be able to talk, and that's good. Okay. So I am very pleased to be here, to be talking to this important group that we value, the group that will actually shape our future, the group that actually has the know-how of making us move forward. My presentation, of course, has to do with the progress towards decent work and economic growth. And I'll start by giving some important figures around this. I think yeah, there's some technology there that we needed to do. So just hold on a little bit. I will have to get to the first slide. Maybe if it is easier from that side, could you just take it up? Just go to the first slide, please. The second one, yes. Yeah, so as you can see from there, we want to start by saying that this is one of the regions that had very good economic growth between 2015 to 2019. It averaged between 3.9% in terms of per capita growth. And this actually surpassed the world figures. We want to appreciate this region because the economic growth that was experienced between 2015 and 2019 also supported the reduction in poverty. It lifted millions of people out of poverty. But we all know that then we had the COVID crisis, which again, gave us issues in terms of output growth. Regionally, we know now that the aggregate rate of GDP has fallen below the pre-pandemic levels, and we see that it will widen further, particularly in East and Northeast Asia, but also Southeast Asia. Next. So when we talk about growth, and also because of this particular SDG, it is really about economic growth, but also decent work. And therefore, we would like to also include important issues here of labor. And we have noticed in this region that we generally have stable labor market indicators, but which actually are hiding what we call decent work deficits. It is important to note that this is one of the regions in the world where female labor market participation has done well, has improved, and it is offsetting, of course, the downward trade in the region. But this is also a region where unemployment has remained unchanged at 4.2% in the past 2 years. And as you know, that the low values of unemployment rates actually are also indicative of another big problem. And that's the problem of informality. And indeed, as you can see there, although informality has fallen from 73% in 2004 to about 65.6% in 2024, it remains the highest globally in terms of absolute numbers. I think we still have 1.3 billion people working informally in the region. But we also have in this region people who are still working in agriculture. We still have subsistence farming as one important part of the work. And people who fall into that category of agriculture, fisheries, and occupations, of elementary occupations, get about 47.5%, which is not a small figure. Next. And this is really just an exposition of these labor market indicators, showing that actually we have been, going down. If we compare from 2004 to 2024, informal employment has been going down, but is still high. On account and contributing family work, again, going down, but is still high. I think the most interesting change there has been the poverty reduction. I think this is one region where we have seen really important changes in terms of extreme and moderate working poverty, which has, I think, reduced by about 41.9 percentage points between 2004 to 2024. Next. Now, that's an interesting graph. Let me look at it from here because I don't have it on my table there. This is very interesting, and I want you to pay particular attention to this because we are making these presentations with the idea in mind of young people, of you. So if you look at this, this is a snapshot, and I'll be presenting this again at the SDG 8 review on the 26th of February at the APFSD. If you look at these statistics or this table, the red talks about targets that are not improving, but they're actually regressing, all right? And then you see the ones in blue, which are talking about those indicators that are actually progressing. But again, if you look at the line of 2024, you will notice that none of these targets has crossed that line of 2024. What does it mean? It means that our progress on this SDG 8 is very slow. It's very slow. We are not meeting the targets. Now, if you look at youth not in education, employment and training, which is 8.61, you have a small dot, a small blue dot there, very far from this line which says that we still have a lot of work to do with the youth in this. You'll also see a number of issues there. I mean, the material footprint, domestic consumption, and injuries, they're actually regressing. This is the most important part of my presentation that you need to take home. That tells us what we need to do with our youth. That tells us what we need to do in this SDG 8 if we are able to proceed. Next slide, please. Now, yeah, so this again exemplifies the challenge that I've just mentioned in terms of youth employment having an issue, as you have seen already in the other slide. But what it tells you is that the youth unemployment rates in this region are high. So when we look at employment figures, we said it was 4.2%. But when we just look at the youth alone, we actually get into double digits. So you'll see, for example, if you look at East Asia has an employment rate of 13.8%. We said the overall one was 4.2, this is 13.8%. And if you look at Southeast Asia and the Pacific, we get up to 15.1%. So there is higher unemployment among the youth, which again is a message to all of us that if we are going to really shift the issues here in terms of SDG 8, then we must put emphasis on supporting our youth. Next slide. Now, an interesting, again, statistic that is really important for the youth, for you, is that when we look at the share of youth who are not in education, employment, or training, which we call the NEET, which is a very important way of really measuring, getting more information other than just the unemployment. All right? In other words, the youth that are idle, they are not in education, they are not in training, they are not in employment. That tells us that Asia Pacific has about 20% of such youth. At the same time, it is also important to note that when we look at the youth in terms of young men and young women, we see that young women actually have NEET rates that are higher, much higher, 30.4% compared to only 11.3% of the men. At the same time, we see that those young women have more difficulties in terms of getting or accessing employment, but also really accessing educational training in general. Now, at the same time, a number of those youth who are working actually tend to work in low productivity sectors. So they are mostly in agriculture, as 4.9% in South Asia, mostly in agriculture, at 23.9% in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and 21.8% in East Asia. So this is, again, if you like, a gloomy picture, but an important one which tells us that we need action around these things. Next slide, please. Now, my next slide is a slide that gives me some recommendations given what I have presented here. Now, the first one is that we must increase youth engagement in the decision-making process to ensure that their voices are heard. Now, many programs that we are engaged in sometimes tend to forget that we need to engage our youth. We should not forget that. At the same time, if we could look at policies that are targeted, target job creation for youth. I know of countries where, because it's difficult for youth to get jobs, where they do tax rebates for companies that are able to employ youth who have just come out of the university, to encourage them to employ youth. Because if you get into the job market, they'll ask you for 15 years experience. You don't have it. All right? So we need targeted job creation for the youth. But at the same time, we need to support skills development for the youth. The digital world is asking us to even do much more around that. What are those important skills that we need? but also supporting the green transitions and other important issues that are happening in the region. But I think more importantly, we should engage into integrated employment and social protection issues. I want to stop here, but the main message is on the graph I gave, which shows that a number of targets that we have are regressing for the SDG 8, but at the same time, that those targets that are targeting the youth are also not making much progress. Progress is slow, and over to us to make sure that we change this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So before we start, I noticed quite number of sleepy participants. Yes, maybe the sleep deprivation and the jet lag has kicked in. So I have talked with the speakers. We have 2 minutes to sort of like energize you a little bit. May I? May I? Thank you so much. So what you're going to do is just follow my lead, okay? Maybe this is the first time you see a transgender person leading something in a room full of cisgender people, but that's okay. Change is always gonna come, okay? So I just need you to slowly pulling any noise from your mouth, but the volume has to match how high or high low my hand is, okay? Like for example, if my hand is this low, just like make a little low volume noise, but as my hand went up, you can also speak louder, okay? So I will just like put it up and down, and then when I clench my fist and throw it to the ground, we are all gonna say together, shouting as loud as we possibly can. Can we shout here? I think we can. Um, just shout as loud as you can. APFSD, okay? Noted? Well noted with thanks. Okay, let's start. Okay, just follow my lead, everyone, okay? 2 minutes off your screen won't hurt your job, okay? Let's start. 1, 2, 3. Let's start smooth. Uh, ah. Louder! 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 Uh, Give yourself a hand of applause. It didn't go as I thought it would go, but hey, we are young people. We love improvise things, okay? Thank you so much, everyone, for just silly little energizer with me. Let's move to our next speakers. From OHCHR, Iza Lechtas. Wait, I now ran out of breath. Whew, I'm aging, guys. Sorry. So, Iza is a human rights officer at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights based in Bangkok, where she works on the human rights of migrants in Asia Pacific. Specific areas of her work include the rights of migrants in vulnerable situations, drivers of migration, and strategic litigation to advance the rights of people on the move. Before joining OHCHR in 2023, Isa led research and advocacy for the rights of refugees and migrants in human rights NGOs. Once again, please give a warm welcome to Isa.
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm going to talk about the concept of vulnerability in migration and how it relates to human rights, but also more specifically to the rights of youth and children on the move. So in international law, there are certain categories of people who have certain rights. For instance, we're talking about refugees or migrant workers or victims of trafficking. So there are certain conventions and treaties that grant specific rights to these people and that states must abide by. But there are many migrants who don't fall into these categories. That doesn't mean they don't have rights. In fact, the international human rights law applies to everyone, regardless of status and regardless of who they are and what category they belong to. And this is important because the concept of migrants in vulnerable situations is important because we're talking about people who are entitled to rights, and the government and the states have a heightened duty towards these people to protect them from human rights violations. And one thing just to note is that when we talk about vulnerability, migrants are not inherently vulnerable. There are situations where migrants can find themselves in which put them at higher risk of being victims of human rights violations. And that's important because people, and migrants included, have agency, have resilience, and make their own decisions. And I think that's important when we talk about migration, and especially when we talk about vulnerability. So there are, I'd say, broadly three categories of vulnerable situations that are relevant here. One relates to the reasons why people left their country. So this can be because of climate change, for example, or disasters. It can be because of conflict or generalized violence. It could also be because people can't enjoy their human rights at home, and that can include, for instance, the right to health, the right to decent work, the right to adequate housing, or the right to education. So these are all situations that when people are compelled to leave their homes and to embark on migratory journeys can make them more vulnerable to human rights abuses because of the situations they left. Perhaps their decision making is very hasty, or they don't have a lot of options. And secondly, it could be what people encounter while they're migrating. So for instance, they could be exposed to violence, they could be exposed to trafficking, they could, during the journey, for instance, lack food, lack water. We all know the stories of people taking very dangerous journeys in Asia Pacific, but also around the world. It could also be situations of detention, of arbitrary detention, when people don't have the regular status, which under international law should be treated as an administrative offense and not a criminal offense. And then there's also situations that are associated with someone's individual characteristics or identity. It could be age, for instance. Children, especially children who are unaccompanied or separated from their families, are in vulnerable situations. It could be because of gender identity, sexual orientation. It could be people with disabilities. So just wanted to give an overview, and there's a guide that OHCHR has produced on the human rights of people in migrants in vulnerable situations, which I can share with the organizers to circulate. Secondly, I wanted to talk briefly about what is driving people to migrate. Because if it's because people can't access their rights at home, and this can include, like I said before, it could be lack of decent work. This is a huge problem in the region. Many people migrate because they feel they have no choice, because They can't earn a decent living, wages are very low, and often people then end up in very precarious migration pathways that could put them at risk of being exploited. And so I think it's very important when we talk about migration to talk about rights at home, and if people have their rights in their own countries, then if they choose to migrate, it's actually a real choice. And it's not only because that's the only way for them to survive, or it's the only way for them to access and enjoy their rights. And finally, I want to talk about the concept and the right of family, the right to family in the concept of in the context of migration. So on the one hand, when children or youth migrate with their families, they have the right to not be arbitrarily detained, the right to education, the right to health, the right to food, the right to adequate housing, again, regardless of immigration status. But there's also families that stay behind where, for instance, a parent migrates or both parents migrate. And something that we're looking into a lot at OHCHR is how to preserve family unity and the right to family life of migrants, either if they can be together and migrate. So people migrate for work, for instance, for them to be able to bring their families so that the right to family unity is preserved, or if they have to stay in their countries, that they're able to visit regularly and really maintain those links. Because often the conversation is about work, but people have rights, and people who migrate have the full range of their rights, including the right to family. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isa. And for our next speaker, last but not least, is Carla Correa. Carla is the UNICEF's Regional Child Rights and Business Specialist for East Asia and the Pacific. Carla is a national of Brazil and has been working with United Nations for 22 years on international cooperation, social policies, and human rights in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. With UNICEF, she works with governments, businesses, and civil society to promote children's rights in business operations in East Asia and the Pacific. Since 2018, she has assisted governments in the region to include the voices and perspectives of children and young people in policy and regulatory action needed in support of decent workplaces. Please give your warm welcome to Carla.
So much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting UNICEF, Sai, and all the organizers for having us here today. And it's a pleasure to be here with you. I have my colleagues from UNICEF here and also my UN colleagues. So very pleased to talk a little bit more about an agenda that is normally not necessarily discussed with young people, but it is an agenda that affects the lives of young people quite significantly. And it's an agenda that we need to start paying more attention to because it provides the opportunity for you to be stronger in your advocacy with governments and with the private sector to really ensure that this world is better for working families and for their children and young people. So may I ask you, have you heard about this concept of care economy? Any of you? Yeah? Do you know what it is? You do? Okay. So some of you know, some of you are still thinking. And I'll give you some clarity around some of the issues that we see happening in this region. Next slide, please. I have a lot of data here, but I'm not going to be like going deep dive on this because we have a limited time. But this is a region with 2 billion workers, Asia Pacific, 2/3 of global employment, right? It's a significant region that is home to a lot of global supply chains, agriculture, manufacturing, and services. It's also a region that is seeing women pretty oppressed in the context of employment. And why is that? Because they're concentrated in these low value added sectors, such as agriculture and retail, with very important decent work deficits, but also with something more particularly invisible, which is the unpaid care jobs, right? So we see that women and young girls, they perform 76% of the total amount of unpaid care work. And this affects the opportunities they're not going to have future in their lives, right? So why this is important for you young people? Because the situation, the lack of time, resources, and services that are happening for working families in a context of unpaid or paid jobs is affecting the opportunities you're going to have in the future of your lives. And it also matters to you because very soon you're going to become probably, maybe not, maybe yes, but you're going to become working families. So next slide, please. I want to highlight the importance of this agenda because there are a lot of gaps that we see, despite this important economic growth that we saw in the last decades in the region, which has translated into employment quality in this region. We saw, especially East Asia Pacific, growing quite significantly as compared to other countries in the world. We still see a lot of issues when it comes to unpaid care work. Is everything going well? Yeah, okay. So unpaid care work is the main reason why women and girls are outside the labor force. We have a lot of people, like 647 million people of working age outside the labor force due to family responsibilities. May I ask you one question? In your house, in your place, who is normally taking more domestic work? Your mom or your dad? And your sister or your brother? Okay, so you know what we're talking about. And this is about care work. So we see mothers of children, especially young children, 0 to 5, suffering unemployment penalty in this region. And this is also in countries like Malaysia, for instance, which is in Thailand, where you see a lot of you see the economy is so vibrant, translating into very soon a high-income country status. How is it possible that we have this important economic employment growth not translated into economic opportunities for women and girls? So it's a situation that is affecting working families, but it's also translating into impacts in the lives of young people, but also children, because children are also significantly invisible in the unpaid care work that they undertake. And also because when the families are not having the best decent working conditions, that affects the livelihoods, the opportunities, and the well-being and the survival of babies and young children. So I'll tell you more about this. Next slide, please. If we move to, let's put a lens on Thailand. We go to the slide, the white slide. Next one, please. Yes. We did a study. We launched this study in October last year. So our colleagues in the country office has developed this study about some of the demographic shifts that are happening in Thailand and what's happening in the context of women having maternity leave and dads not having any kind of support. Do you know how long does normally maternity leave last in your country? It changes. 6 months, less, 98 days, depends on the country, right? And paternity leave. 7 days. Anyone else? No? So you see there is a huge discrepancy, right, in paid parental leave. So Thailand, is one of these countries that is translating into a high-income country very soon, which has no appropriate provisions for paid parental leave. And you see that with the aging population, this is going to translate into a lot of care issues for elderly. So we have been using this evidence that we created about the importance of paternity leave we're still falling very short in Thailand. So you see that with the severe demographic challenges, with the lowest birth rate in over 70 years and an aging population that is expected to reach 1/3 of the total population, you see Thailand has, for instance, not only very short, limited paid paternity leave, but also something that we call breastfeeding support. So when you are a worker and you are a mother, you don't have any support to breastfeed your kids. So that's why you see Thailand falling very short in the breastfeeding rate in the country. So UNICEF is working closely to increase the understanding of governments and business on the importance of having this time, resources, and services available for working families. And this is translating into an agenda that we're calling a care systems agenda. Let's move next. And I wanted just to, so Fiji, for instance, you see here, 9 out of 10 parents who are working said that child care responsibilities impact their work. So in addition to limited paternity and maternity leave, low breastfeeding support, what about child care services, right? So when we interview families, that's what we get. A lot of families, dads and moms, they miss work, they are late to work, or they are distracted at work, and that is also impacting productivity. So it's an agenda that should matter to governments and employers, for instance. Let's go next. So there is an agenda that we call care work, and I'm glad that my colleague Ken has talked to you about the importance of employability. And this is an agenda that it is as important for you because it has implications not only for children, but across the life cycle. It has an importance for the opportunities you're going to have in life when you're young and when you're adult because of the time, the resources, and the services that your parents have had access to ensure that you have the best start in life. If we move next, and I'm closing here, I just want to give you a picture of what's happening in the world in terms of paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave. Only 15 countries in the world have 3 basic national policies that allow parents and caregivers the time and the resources to care for their children. So 6 months of paid maternity leave and 4 weeks of paid paternity, 6 months of paid breastfeeding breaks, and 2 years of tuition-free primary education. So you see there is a lot of work for us to do in this agenda. And there is a different world situation. If we move to the next slide, please. Can you still hear me? What about people online? Yeah? Okay, great. So we also are in a region that unfortunately, and I don't think people can hear you. Maybe you want to use this. Can you hear me now? Perfect. And apart from all the issues we see in indecent working conditions for families and caregivers, we still face this issue, right? And all of these issues together, they contribute to the increase of poverty. And that situation has worsened after COVID, and now we're building back. But as we build back, it's important for us to keep in our minds that most vulnerable, we still have in this region around 122 million children in a situation of child labor. And millions of them are not enrolled at school. So next slide, please. In UNICEF, we are looking for a way that we can move into an economy of care, to a system of care, to a society of care. And for us to get there, let's go to the next slide, please. We need to ensure that some specific groups, like children, persons with disabilities, and older people are included, right? So it's the care economy, as I started this conversation today with you, is a subset of care support systems which primarily focus on paid care work, which has to do with formal and informal work, but also unpaid care work that is not visible, that domestic work that affects opportunities in the future, that work that is not necessarily being well paid. And it focuses on working age caregivers such as women, but does not typically include the roles of children, persons with disabilities, and old persons. So for us to move from a care economy to a care society, we need to make sure that the systems are inclusive. And that's why it's pretty important that young people understand that advocating for policies of care regulations of care for children since they are young will be important for them to have access to opportunities when they're young, when they're adolescents and when they're adults and young. There is another concept that in UNICEF we became quite familiar with. We started advocating since 2019 on the importance of workplaces to be family friendly. So we are advocating for governments, for businesses and civil society to ensure that there are policies for workplaces that takes into consideration the importance of the time, of the resources and the services for working parents and caregivers to give access to the best start of life for their children. So if we go to the last slide, please. And this is the recommendations that we would like that you could advocate with us, you could help us make our voice bolder when it comes to governments and business. And we say business because business are also employers. And if we think about a region of 2 billion workers, we need to put pressure on governments, but we also need to put pressure on the private sector to ensure that we can create a society of care that gives the best condition for children, for young people, through the conditions and the well-being of working families and caregivers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Carla, for basically closing the presenter session for this plenary. Now, trying to be mindful of the time, I would like to give an opportunity for two people to, if they ask, oh my God, so many, which people? Okay, one and then two. Yes, you and then you. I don't even remember which you I point. No, I'm just kidding. Let's wait.
Hi, I'm No, and I work on SRHR and disability justice. So my question was actually, I was really interested in when you said care economy, and also to how immigration, when someone, for example, is disabled, how do you see disability based violence, right? How do you look at it through an intersectional lens? Yes, but also more than that, look at it centering the lens of disability, not only leave no one behind, but intentionally include everyone, right? With disabled people at the center. So I really want to highlight on disability-based violence, where women and girls with disabilities, we face a lot of violence where we are dependent on others for our livelihood, for our survival. This is no secret. It's how we move ahead in life. But how that manifests in, for example, confiscation of mobility aids or basic needs, right? Like not giving medicine on time. Our caregivers might be abusive. There's a lot of um, again, violence, intimate partner violence disguised as abuse, um, pushing the wheelchair in a direction where we don't want it to go, violation of consent in everyday touch, right? So I just wanted to ask, what is the what does the government think of this, and at the policy level, what are the changes in this? Because as I've seen, there's a vague mention of disabled girls and women. It's not being centered. So yeah, just
So much. Do you want?
Sure. Thank you for your question. And it's such an important one because the visibility of persons with disabilities is not there. This is what we see. I cannot tell you what the governments in this region think. I can say from what we know is that the policies that we have today are not sensitive and not even transformative or progressive when it comes to persons with disabilities. And what we have to do is to, first of all, understand from persons from disability, what do they want to see changing in the existing policies, so we can promote through evidence what are the changes that needs to happen in those policy frameworks. The agenda of care and support comes with the part of support, because it's not only having those policies available. It's, in addition to care, we need to provide support exactly because of persons with disabilities, because of the inequities and inequalities that we see in the current systems. So paid paternity leave, paid maternity leave will not solve the gaps that we have with persons with disabilities. We need to do way more than that. And we need to make sure that there is more evidence to inform, and evidence that comes from the voices of people from persons with disability, to say what needs to change in what we're seeing today in workplaces. There's a lot of what companies are doing today to ensure that there is better facilities, but it's still very limited. And that's just the beginning of a conversation from our perspective. I'm not sure if any colleague would like to add anything.
No, I think this is a very important reflection that you have given. Indeed, what we do, for example, at the ILO, is to work with governments and encourage and build awareness that people with disabilities need to be supported. And in the ILO itself, we have deliberate actions to support that. So, for example, when we are having interns, we want interns to join the ILO, we have deliberate support for those who are living with disabilities. If we are employing, we have deliberate support for the application process, but also targeting those who are living with disabilities. And so also supporting mainstreaming in all these national policies, but in all these strategies that we have, because we have got to start now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's move to the second question.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, all the speakers. So I'm going to ask to Mr. Shawa. So based on your presentation, you show us the data about the needs among youth is particularly elevated for young women compared to young men. So my question is, what are the main structural or systematic barriers that contribute to the data that you already show us? That's all. Thank you.
So I think that's a very important question, and I'm happy that you picked it up. So we're talking about need rates. 20% in this region, really, if you look at the young people. And of course, when you look at the gender disaggregated, we still see the young, we call them young women, so meaning girls and all these people, being more disadvantaged. In fact, it's almost 3 times, 2.5 times more. So you have 30% and you have 12%. The reasons are embodied in what my colleague from UNICEF actually presented. Women or young women tend to be more involved in care jobs at home. They tend to be outside the labor force, and therefore the likelihood that they will actually be neat is higher than young men. And I think she asked a very good question here. Who does a lot of domestic work at home? And you all said, mom. And she asked again, sister or brother? And you all said, sister. It starts from there. And that systemic kind of issues surrounding young women just gets compounded with other, of course, cultural issues and other, of course, economic issues as well. I would leave it at that, but we can also have a more bilateral talk.
Thank you so much. Now let's answer one question from our online participants. Can someone read it? Thank you. Do you need any mic?
We have some questions in the chat, and so Balbia has written, what immediate actions can be taken to address unemployment crisis among youth in rural and urban areas, especially in countries facing economic instability or the effects of climate change? This is a question on what immediate actions can be taken on unemployment crisis. Then we also have another question around how can young people raise their voices about economic opportunities and decent work, particularly in the context of progress towards economic growth in the Asia-Pacific region, with a focus on gender equality and human rights when they are struggling to find jobs and facing issues like unpaid work and systemic inequalities? How can youth movements address these challenges and advocate for better wages and equal opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you so much for our speakers. Okay.
Okay, great. So thanks so much for that question. Yes, indeed, there is an employment crisis in terms of really how this affects the youth as compared to, all the adults. Youth unemployment is higher than the general one, but also higher than for adults. There are a number of issues that need to be done immediately, as you ask. The first one is that we must have good youth employment policies targeted for for the youth. I gave an example when I was making a presentation that some countries have developed what we call tax rebates given to companies that are employing the youth. So instead of waiting for 10 years of experience, some companies will say, well, we'll employ this person, even if he or she does not have the experience, we will actually train them. But to encourage that, a macro policy through the fiscal policy that encourages these companies is to say, okay, you do that employment and then we give you a tax rebate. You don't pay taxes for a period of time. So the firms are incentivized to employ the youth. The other one is targeted skills development. Where are those jobs where actually are friendly to the youth? We know, for example, that jobs in the digitalization space, jobs in the AI space, these are jobs that are really attracting the youth. Why don't we skill the youth around those jobs that are likely to be jobs of their interest? All right. You talked about climate change as well. Yes. Why don't we have shock-sensitive social protection that targets our youth? So these are some of those immediate issues that I would want to mention. I think on the other, gender equality and human rights, I will leave it to my colleague.
Thank you. And I can say a few words. I mean, I think the question was broader, but it is certainly in the context of migration. Just a couple of weeks ago here in Bangkok, we had the second Asia-Pacific review of the Global Compact on Migration, which is a set of commitments that governments around the world took in 2018. And this was the second time that it was reviewed in this region. And so governments came together, UN agencies, civil society, migrants, to discuss, progress towards the implementation of these objectives, which actually are not really new in terms of new rights, but really provide a platform to discuss this progress, but also the gaps. So I think just in terms of making the most of these platforms, I think we always emphasize the need for meaningful participation. I think this includes youth, it includes migrants, whatever their status, in the sense that participation mustn't be tokenistic, but it must be meaningful, it must be inclusive. And I think it's, I think what can the workers, I think the question was about, when people are working and facing low wages and those hardships, like how can there be participation? But I think it's also on the responsibility is also on conveners of these platforms to make it possible, right, for groups to participate, bearing in mind the realities. And certainly in the context of the Global Compact on Migration, we had a youth representative who spoke at the plenary. There were representative of migrant organizations. So I think it's a work in progress that we all need to learn, and we also need to hear, what are the needs and how can we make accommodation, how can we make that work? Thanks.
Thank you. And perhaps I would just add that it's not your responsibility to create the jobs for your future or for your present, but it's important that your voice is in the discussion. It's important that policymakers, the private sector, and those who are shaping the decisions around employment are listening to your voice. So while we understand it's not your responsibility, you might want to be part of the discussion. So let's keep shouting, let's keep putting pressure and make sure that these voices and these perspectives are included in the shaping of the new policies or in the reform of the existing policies, because we need to keep pushing. I think that's my additional and final comment. Thank you.
Everybody, please give your applause for our speakers. And thank you so much for engaging in this session until, I cannot read my clock. 4:36. Oh, thank you so much. Yes. So we finally at the end of the session. And once again, I would like to thank our speakers for coming here into the Youth Forum to share your expertise and experiences with us. And I would like to maybe just summarize a little that it's very important for us youth activists or just young people in general to highlight that our struggles, and in this session context, under the context of unemployment, will always exist as a form of oppression. And we have to remind ourselves that this happens systematically